I miss you already. That was the message, glowing stark and cruel on Daniel's burner phone screen, a device he swore was only for international clients. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. That specific moment, the clinical glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes, the absolute coldness that settled in my chest, is one of those pivot points in life. Days that change everything, yet start like any other, only to end with the complete dissolution of the reality you thought you inhabited. Now, before we dive deeper into this mess, into the meticulous, almost surgical process of dismantling my own marriage, I need to know, where are you listening from right now? Drop your city and the time in the comments below. Knowing that we share this moment of vulnerability across distances gives me strength. My name is Amelia, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I genuinely believed I was living the cliché of the American dream. We had the house in the affluent suburbs of Dallas, the joint accounts, the successful careers, and a marriage that had sailed smoothly past the decade-and-a-half mark. Daniel was charming, ambitious, and I thought, completely devoted. Our circle was tight. We trusted everyone, especially Sarah, our neighbor and closest confidant, the one I used to share wine and trivial secrets with across the fence. My confidence in Daniel was absolute. It wasn't just trust. It was the comfortable, lazy assumption that comes from years of shared history, a profound, devastating blindness. You are listening to The Unveiled Truth, the place where we turn pain into power, where we shed the shame of betrayal and find the strength to rebuild. If you're ready to hear how I turned a nightmare into a rebirth, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss the ending of this story. For years, our life was a finely tuned machine of stability. We had our Sunday brunches, our shared Google Calendar tracking every appointment, and that daily ritual kiss goodbye as Daniel left for his high-profile finance job downtown. We were the couple everyone else admired for our foundation. I truly believed we were immune to the common frailties that broke other marriages. We had negotiated career changes, health scares, and financial pressures. Surely the trivial lure of an affair couldn't touch us. I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't knock. It simply lives within your walls until you accidentally stumble upon it. The fraying started subtly, the way termites eat wood from the inside out. Daniel's work trips, which had always been rare and predictable, suddenly became urgent and frequent, stretching into long weekends. He started carrying that second phone, claiming it was a required security measure for a new international client. A lie so thin I should have seen straight through it, but I didn't want to. I chose not to. The biggest red flag was the phone itself. It was always face down on the nightstand, or clutched tightly in his hand, even when we were just watching TV. If I entered the room unexpectedly, the screen would flash off instantly, followed by a sudden, exaggerated casualness. "Just checking the market," he'd mumble, but the nervous tick in his jaw betrayed him. Then there was the scent. Not a cheap motel perfume, but a subtle, musky fragrance that clung to his dress. Shirts when I did the laundry, completely different from my signature scent. When I asked about it, he was immediately defensive, snapping, "It must be the dry cleaner's new detergent, Amelia. Stop being paranoid." I rationalized everything. Stress from work, the pressure of his promotion, the general anxiety of running a large household. My trust was supposed to be my shield, but in reality, it was the blindfold he pulled over my eyes, allowing him to operate in the shadows. I spent weeks suppressing the churning dread in my stomach, silencing that small, insistent voice that whispered, "Something is fundamentally wrong." That Monday night, the paranoia peaked. Daniel claimed to be pulling an all-nighter at the office. I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was deafening, amplified only by the dull ache behind my eyes that promised a migraine. I finally crept downstairs, pulled his spare laptop from the study safe. the one he always forgot to lock and plugged in a flash drive. I was looking for financial anomalies, an excuse, anything, to prove my fears were baseless. What I found instead was a shared folder synced to a cloud account, labeled innocuously as Client Reports. Inside, nestled among spreadsheets and presentations, were the photographs I downloaded. Daniel and Sarah, smiling too wide, touching too intimately, in places that were definitely not the office. I was supposed to leave early Tuesday morning for a full-day seminar in Austin. I had packed my briefcase, set the GPS, and planned the whole trip perfectly. But as I sat in the car, ready to pull out of the driveway, the splitting migraine that had been building since midnight finally hit, slamming into me with punishing force. I couldn't drive. I had to cancel the seminar. I pulled my briefcase back inside, intending to spend the day in the dark, silent bedroom. I was back home at 8:30 a.m., hours before anyone expected me. The silence inside the house was profound, unnerving, and the faint scent of that forbidden musk was already beginning to drift from the master bedroom. I knew, absolutely, definitively, that I was not alone. The dull, throbbing pain that had been building since midnight finally hit, slamming into me with punishing force. I couldn't drive. I had to cancel the seminar. I pulled my briefcase back inside, intending to spend the day in the dark, silent bedroom. I was back home at 8:30 a.m., hours before anyone expected me. The silence inside the house was profound, unnerving, and the faint scent of that forbidden musk was already beginning to drift from the master bedroom. I knew, absolutely, definitively, that I was not alone. I stood rooted in the foyer. The briefcase felt heavy, a useless prop in the face of the mounting dread. I had come home seeking refuge from a physical ache, only to walk directly into an emotional catastrophe. That scent, cheap, cloying, like synthetic sandalwood and something vaguely floral, was a poison gas filling the air, a scent I had registered peripherally for weeks, always dismissing it as a lingering perfume from a social event, or maybe the detergent the cleaners used. Now, standing there, it was a siren, screaming the truth my carefully constructed reality had refused to acknowledge. Ethan's car was in the garage. He was supposed to be at his early morning meeting, downtown. He always left by 7:15 sharp. My mind started working through the possibilities, desperately trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he had forgotten his wallet. Maybe he was taking a sick day too. But the silence wasn't the kind of silence that accompanies solitary rest. It was the oppressive hush of secrecy. I slipped off my leather pumps, leaving them beside the stairs. The wool carpet muffled my approach, turning me into a ghost in my own home. I wasn't rushing. Panic would have me sprinting up those stairs, throwing open the door and screaming. But I didn't feel panic. I felt a cold, surgical precision replacing the migraine. I was gathering evidence, moving toward a verdict. The scent was intoxicatingly strong on the landing. It smelled like deceit. It smelled like Clara. Clara, our neighbor, the woman whose children I baked cookies for, the person who had sat next to me at Thanksgiving just 2 months prior, laughing about how predictable our husbands were. My hand was already shaking, but not from fear. It was the kinetic energy of betrayal. I pulled my phone from my pocket, setting it to video recording. I did not look at the screen. I just needed the capture mechanism active. The master bedroom door was closed, but not fully latched. I could hear the faint, rhythmic creak of the headboard against the wall, a sound that was simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. I inhaled, once tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline, and gently, slowly, pushed the door inward just enough to create a sliver of vision. The scene was framed perfectly by the dark oak door jamb. Our room, the sanctuary of our marriage, was violently desecrated. Ethan was there. His face, usually reserved and professional, was slackened with a look of cheap, satisfied indulgence. And next to him, tangled in the duvet I had bought in Florence, was Clara. Her usually neat blonde hair was a mess against my white pillows. The first thing I registered wasn't their nudity, which was immediate and dismissible, but the sight of Ethan's wedding band glinting dully under the morning light streaming through the blinds. It wasn't tucked away or hidden. It was proudly displayed, a mocking symbol of the vows he was breaking with casual brutality. There was no sound from me, no gasp, no sob, no scream. The entire world contracted to that 3-foot gap in the doorway. It was the most intimate moment of my life, yet I was the ghost, the voyeur of my own destruction. I held the phone steady, moving it slowly, capturing the entire scope of the scene. The clothes discarded on the floor, the champagne flute, mine, on the bedside table, and their faces. I zoomed slightly, ensuring their identities were undeniable. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. This was calculated, comfortable infidelity, done in the marital bed, under the guise of an 8:30 morning meeting. They hadn't heard me. They were lost in their sordid little bubble. I pulled the phone back, stopped the recording, and backed away from the door, closing it again with painstaking slowness, making sure the latch clicked barely audibly. My strategy crystallized instantly. I would not give them the satisfaction of a confrontation, a dramatic fight that they could twist into a mutual misunderstanding. This was a legal and financial transaction, now, and I had the evidence needed for total victory. My feet moved swiftly down the stairs, ignoring the briefcase still sitting abandoned by the railing. I walked past the kitchen, past the perfect life that was now ashes, straight into the home office. I locked the office door, feeling the satisfying thud of the deadbolt. My hands, which had been so steady while filming, now gripped the desk edge until my knuckles were white. But I didn't cry. Crying was a waste of valuable time. The first call was to my lawyer, David Miller. "David," I said, my voice shockingly level, sounding like I was discussing quarterly projections. "I need an emergency restraining order and immediate filing for divorce, citing indisputable evidence of adultery. I have the video evidence, time-stamped and dated, taken 10 minutes ago in my home." He was stunned into momentary silence. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Who was it?" "It doesn't matter who he was with," I replied, staring out the window at the familiar oak tree, now just a blur of green. "What matters is what happens next. I want the locks changed by noon. I want him served by 2 o'clock. And David, I need to know the name of Clara's husband's divorce lawyer. I think he might be needing one very soon." The second call was harder, but necessary. I had to alert David, the other victim, before Ethan or Clara could try to cover their tracks. He deserved to hear the truth from someone who hadn't cheapened it. I took a deep breath, the lingering perfume still catching in my throat, and dialed a number I had always associated with neighborhood barbecues and shared holidays. I was about to drop a bomb into his perfectly manicured life, just as one had landed in mine. "David, it's Eleanor. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan." The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. The throbbing pain behind my eyes was the only reason they got caught. I was supposed to be in a marathon strategy session downtown, but a blinding, sudden migraine had seized me just after lunch. I didn't even bother to text Ethan an elaborate excuse. I just sent a clipped message. "Headache. Going home. Don't call." I needed darkness, silence, and the potent pills tucked away in the master bathroom cabinet. It was an inconvenience, a disruption to my perfectly scheduled Tuesday, but I was looking forward to the quiet sanctuary of our home in Cherry Creek. I pulled the Lexus into the driveway just after 2:30 p.m. That was the first red flag, though my throbbing skull almost missed it. Ethan's black SUV was already parked in the garage. He had told me explicitly he had a late, unavoidable meeting with a potential investor that would keep him until at least 6. Why was his car here? I dismissed it instantly. Maybe the meeting was canceled. Maybe he just needed a document. My trust in him was so absolute, so thoroughly ingrained after 15 years, that suspicion was a foreign language I couldn't yet translate. I opened the front door quietly, not wanting to disturb the silence I craved. The air inside the foyer hit me, cool, still, and carrying a scent that wasn't ours. It was heavy, floral, and deeply familiar. It was Clara's perfume. Clara, my neighbor, my confidant, the woman who had helped me pick out the linen curtains in this very house, who had watered my plants during every vacation, whose daughter called me Auntie E. The silence was the second terrifying clue. Too deep. The kind of silence that swallows sound, not the natural hum of a house alone. My migraine, mercifully, had vanished, replaced by a cold, metallic dread that tightened around my chest. I left my bag by the stairs, every fiber of my being suddenly focused. I took the steps one by one, slowly, carefully, my hand gliding over the banister we had stained together on a Saturday afternoon years ago. Each step was a beat of a drum, leading to a reckoning. As I reached the landing, the scent became overpowering. It clung to the air like a veil. I knew where Ethan and I kept the strong headache medication, the master bath. I rounded the corner toward the bedroom door. It wasn't closed. It was ajar, resting maybe an inch off the frame. I didn't yell. I didn't gasp. All the noise, all the pain, all the years of blind devotion compressed into a single, lethal thought. Don't warn them. I pushed the door open just enough for my eyes to register the scene. It was precisely what the perfume had promised. Ethan, my Ethan and Clara, my friend, entangled in a sickening, casual intimacy upon our bed. The duvet I had carefully chosen, the pillows embroidered with our initials. It wasn't loud or desperate. It was comfortable, practiced, routine. That casualness was the sharpest blade. The shock didn't register as tears or screams. It registered as absolute zero. A strategist took over the controls of my body, the loving wife dissolving into the shadows. My hand, steady as stone, reached for my phone, which I always kept on silent. The camera app opened instantly. I held the phone up, keeping my body hidden mostly behind the doorframe, and began to record. I didn't zoom in on the explicit details. I focused on their faces, the recognizable features, the undeniable context. I filmed the clothes discarded on the floor, Clara's distinctive gold watch resting on my nightstand, the evidence of their long-standing comfort in this betrayal. I needed proof, concrete and undeniable, for the courts, for the community, for the utter destruction I knew I had to unleash. I filmed for a full 60 seconds, until I had documented enough to shatter 2 lives. Then, with an unnerving, icy calm, I pulled the door, shut, not slamming it, but closing it with a deliberate, soft click. They were so engrossed, so arrogant in their safety, they didn't hear the minor adjustment. I reached out and carefully, silently, turned the deadbolt, locking them inside the room with their shame. I retreated to the quiet sanctity of the guest bathroom, my heart hammering a violent rhythm against my ribs, but my mind already 3 steps ahead. They were trapped, physically for the moment, legally forever. I wasn't just walking away, I was securing the crime scene. The next move had to be precise, coordinated, and devastating. I sank onto the edge of the closed toilet seat, pulled up my contacts, and stared at the name I now needed to deliver this payload to, David, Clara's husband. He deserved to hear the truth from someone who hadn't cheapened it. I took a deep breath, the lingering perfume still catching in my throat, and dialed a number I had always associated with neighborhood barbecues and shared holidays. I was about to drop a bomb into his perfectly manicured life, just as one had landed in mine. David, it's Eleanor. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan. The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. It wasn't a premonition or a sudden flash of insight that brought me home early that Tuesday. It was pure, irritating logistics. I was due at the title company in downtown Chicago for a major property closing, but the paralegal called, sounding frantic. We needed the original executed deed for our current house, the one Ethan insisted on keeping in his private, fireproof safe in the study. A 20-minute nuisance detour in the middle of a workday. That 20-minute detour saved my future, even as it obliterated my present. I pulled into the quiet, sun-drenched driveway. The first red flag wasn't visible. It was auditory. Too much silence. Ethan's meeting was supposed to last until 5, yet his sedan was parked snugly in the garage. Maybe he forgot something important, too. I tried to rationalize, but the cold dread was already a metallic taste on my tongue. I let myself in using my key, expecting the house to feel empty and cool. Instead, it felt charged, heavy. The air conditioning was running high, attempting to scrub the atmosphere, but it failed. A sickly sweet, artificial scent clung to the air, a scent I knew intimately from countless shared lunches and neighborhood book clubs. Clara's scent. That specific, slightly too sweet vanilla perfume she always wore, the one she insisted was her signature. My heart didn't race. It plummeted, leaving a hollow echo in my chest. I didn't feel rage yet, only a profound, intellectual certainty that the perfect life I had built was a cheap, hastily constructed stage set. I walked toward the study first, moving silently on the polished marble floor. Nothing. The safe was closed. My legs carried me, inevitably, up the grand staircase. Every single step creaked under my weight, yet the silence from the top floor remained absolute. They must have been deafened by their own audacity. The master bedroom door wasn't fully closed. It was left slightly ajar, a lazy invitation. I didn't need to hear anything. The silence was louder than any moan. I stopped directly in front of the gap. My breath caught, not in a gasp of panic, but in a hitch of cold, calculated precision. I leaned forward, nudging the heavy wooden panel with the edge of my briefcase. The gap widened just enough to reveal the scene inside. It wasn't a frantic, clumsy grapple. That would have been easier to dismiss as a momentary lapse of judgment. This was comfortable. They were lying across the silk duvet, half-dressed, their bodies relaxed against each other. Ethan was resting his head on his hand, looking down at Clara, whose face was tilted up toward his. They were talking, smiling, sharing a joke perhaps, with a level of intimate ease that spoke not of an affair, but of a second, hidden relationship thriving in the shadows of our marriage. It was the tenderness, the shared history reflected in that simple moment of repose that truly severed the final chord. They had built a life together on my foundation. For a full minute, I simply stood there, an uninvited audience to the final act of my marriage. I felt nothing, absolutely nothing, except the icy clarity of strategy, the primitive urge to scream, to shatter the vase on the dresser, to demand answers. It never materialized. My adult self, the CEO, the woman who handled multi-million-dollar negotiations, took over. I reached into my handbag, steadying my hand against the doorframe, and pulled out my phone. I activated the video camera. The movement was slow, deliberate, silent. I zoomed in just enough to capture their faces, the tangle of their limbs, the clock on the bedside table confirming the time and date. I needed airtight evidence. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about securing my future, my assets, and my dignity. I let the video roll for 2 minutes, capturing the casual laughter, the gentle touches, the undeniable proof of their sustained, disrespectful liaison. When I had enough, I lowered the phone, took one last snapshot of Clara's expensive shoes tossed carelessly near the door, shoes I had complimented her on just last week, and quietly pulled the bedroom door shut. The soft, final click of the latch was the loudest sound I heard all day. It sealed their fate. I didn't confront them. I didn't linger. I walked back down the stairs, collected my briefcase, and exited the house, leaving the false comfort of my perfect suburban life behind me. I didn't even bother driving out of the neighborhood. I parked 3 blocks away, under the shade of an oak tree, and reviewed the footage. It was solid. It was devastating. The time for blind fury was over. The time for calculated destruction had begun. I needed an accomplice, someone whose pain matched mine, someone who would understand the sheer, disgusting depth of the betrayal. I didn't want to be the sole bearer of this toxic truth. That's when I called David. I needed him to hear the truth from someone who hadn't cheapened it. I took a deep breath, the lingering perfume still catching in my throat, and dialed a number I had always associated with neighborhood barbecues and shared holidays. I was about to drop a bomb into his perfectly manicured life, just as one had landed in mine. David, it's Eleanor. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan. The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal. I was initiating a professional hostile takeover. The agonizing pressure behind my eyes felt like a physical fist trying to push through my skull. I had to abandon the merger briefing. The numbers were blurring. The noise was unbearable. Ethan thought I was tied up downtown until late, probably closer to 8, which was exactly why I hadn't called him. I just needed silence and darkness, and the quickest route to both was the 2:30 train back to our house in Greenwich. The minute I pulled my black sedan onto the cobblestone driveway, the first prickle of unease started to crawl up my neck. Clara's black Lexus RX, the one she insisted on keeping pristine, was parked haphazardly, half-tucked behind Ethan's enormous truck. It was odd. Clara, my dear friend and next-door neighbor, never stopped by, unannounced unless she was dropping off paperwork for the HOA or borrowing a cup of sugar. And even then, she always called first. I told myself she must be waiting for me, perhaps trying to arrange our weekly tennis match. I parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my flats. The front door was not just unlocked. It was ajar, pulled slightly inward by the latch chain. My internal alarm bells started screaming, drowning out the lingering throb of my headache. Ethan was meticulous about security. I pushed the door open, slipping inside the vast, silent entry hall. The house was too quiet. It wasn't the calm quiet of an empty afternoon. It was a pressurized, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes a storm. And then I smelled it. A sickeningly sweet cocktail that cut through the sterile air conditioning. It was Ethan's sandalwood and patchouli cologne, the custom blend I had bought him in Paris, clashing violently with Clara's cheap, heavy, synthetic rose perfume. The combination was noxious, a physical manifestation of betrayal hanging in the atmosphere. I stopped breathing. The headache vanished, replaced by a focused, chilling dread that centered squarely in my gut. My eyes lifted to the grand staircase, drawn by an invisible thread. The master bedroom door, usually wide open, was closed. I didn't call out. I didn't want to break the silence. I wanted to witness it in its purest, most vile form. Kicking off my shoes, I moved silently across the Persian rug, the sound of my own heartbeat deafening in my ears. Each upward step felt like a historical marker, counting down the last seconds of my innocence. As I reached the landing, I heard a low, muffled sound. Not a word, just a soft, intimate sigh that made my blood freeze. I reached the door. I did not knock. I did not hesitate. The knob was cold beneath my hand. I turned it slowly, pushing the heavy oak inward just enough to see the entirety of the tableau inside. They were there, carelessly strewn across the immaculate white silk duvet I had just bought from Restoration Hardware. The afternoon light, usually so tranquil, seemed to highlight the obscenity of the scene. It wasn't the physical act itself that registered first. It was the casual, arrogant intimacy. Clara's head was tilted back, her eyes closed, her dark hair a stark contrast against my pillows. Ethan's arm was thrown over, her waist, the posture of a man completely at ease, completely at home, in his sin. My emerald and diamond tennis bracelet, the one I had given him for his birthday, lay discarded on the mahogany nightstand. The shock did not paralyze me. It catalyzed me. All the years of professional training, the cutthroat negotiations, the requirement for absolute control in crisis surged to the surface. I was not a woman scorned. I was a lawyer building a case. I did not scream. I did not move further into the room. My hand automatically went into the pocket of my expensive tailored blazer and retrieved my cell phone. With an almost surgical precision, I navigated to the video recording app and pressed record. I held the phone steady, zooming slightly to capture their startled, terrified faces as they finally registered my presence standing silently in the doorway. Ethan's eyes widened, a sickening mix of shame and panic replacing the lust. He scrambled, backward, pulling the sheet up, his mouth opening and closing uselessly, trying to form an excuse that would never come. Clara just stared, her face white, her composure utterly shattered. They looked pathetic, caught like rats in a trap. I recorded for 90 full seconds, capturing the context, the identity, the undeniable proof of their betrayal in the very bed we shared. I didn't need their dialogue. The image was enough. When I was satisfied, I lowered the phone. The recording secured. I took 2 deliberate steps back, never breaking eye contact with Ethan, whose frantic silent pleas I coldly ignored. My face was a blank slate of indifference. I closed the door, not with a violent slam, but with a quiet, firm click of the latch. It was the sound of a final period at the end of a sentence. I descended the stairs, my steps now purposeful and loud. I walked directly to the kitchen island, retrieved a glass, and filled it with chilled water, watching my own reflection in the stainless steel appliances. My hands were perfectly steady. I was calm, collected, and ready for war. They were upstairs, panicking, scrambling to dress, assuming I was upstairs screaming at them. They had misjudged me entirely. I pulled up David's number. David, Clara's kind, oblivious husband, the partner of my closest friend. Or so I had thought. He deserved the truth, delivered clinically and efficiently. More importantly, I needed an ally, a strategic partner in destruction. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about ensuring they suffered the maximum legal and social consequences. David answered on the second ring, his voice pleasant, professional, completely unaware that his life was about to implode. David? It's Eleanor. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan. The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal, I was initiating a professional hostile takeover, an alliance founded on shared ruin and the meticulous pursuit of justice. It was a headache, relentless and blinding, that saved me. I had been planning to work late that Tuesday, finalizing the merger documents that had consumed my life for the past 6 months. But around 2 p.m., the pain spiked behind my eyes, turning the bright computer screen into a torture device. I called my assistant, said I was going home to our quiet New Jersey suburb, and promised to review the final drafts from my study. It felt like a simple logistical decision, but in retrospect, it was fate rerouting my entire future. Driving back across the bridge felt alien. I rarely saw our quiet street in the middle of the afternoon. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Ethan's sedan. Why is he here? He often worked from home, but he always scheduled his calls loudly in the downstairs office, pacing aggressively while discussing quarterly projections. The house should have been humming with his presence, or at least his loud, characteristic whistling, which always annoyed me, but was a comforting fixture of our life. But there was silence, a deep, unnatural quiet that pressed against my eardrums as soon as I turned off the engine. I unlocked the front door, the familiar click sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. "Ethan?" I called out, hanging my keys on the hook. No reply. The downstairs office door was ajar, the laptop closed, the screen dark. I walked through the kitchen. Nothing. The air, though, felt thick. It wasn't the comforting scent of our usual vanilla candle or the faint, reassuring smell of the cedarwood cologne I had bought Ethan last Christmas. It was heavy, overtly, floral and utterly foreign. Clara's signature scent, something aggressively sweet that always managed to cling to her brightly colored scarves. My stomach lurched, not from the pain, which had mysteriously vanished, but from a cold, metallic dread. I told myself it was absurd. Clara, our neighbor, often dropped off cookies or borrowed tools. Maybe she had stopped by for a quick moment and Ethan was upstairs, taking a crucial private conference call in the bedroom. That was the logical explanation. My life was logical. I ascended the stairs slowly, deliberately avoiding the squeaky third step that Ethan always swore he would fix. My own footsteps felt impossibly loud against the unnerving silence. The logical explanation dissolved, replaced by a hyper-awareness, a sharp clarity that felt like electricity running through my veins. The master bedroom door was closed, not latched, just gently pulled shut. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the cold, brass knob. Everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and my stability was resting on the inside of that door. I took a deep, shaky breath, tasting that saccharine perfume again, potent and sickening. I turned the knob. The sight didn't register as reality immediately. It was a tableau, a grotesque still life composed of white linen, tangled limbs, and a gasp of horrified recognition. Ethan, my husband of 15 years, and Clara, the woman whose children I had helped, chaperone on countless field trips, were fused together on our bed. The sound was the worst part. A small, pathetic whimper that caught in Ethan's throat as he looked up and saw me standing there, framed in the doorway, bathed in the stark afternoon light. His eyes, wide with pure panic, were the eyes of a cornered animal caught in the flashlight beam. Clara only buried her face deeper into the pillow, a pathetic, shameful huddle of blonde hair and exposed skin. I did not scream. I did not drop the expensive leather bag still hanging on my shoulder. The primal instinct to collapse or rage simply short-circuited. Instead, a chilling professional calm descended upon me, the kind of detachment I employed when negotiating millions. This wasn't personal. This was evidence. My hand went automatically to the purse. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it with the speed of muscle memory, and engaged the video function. I raised the phone, steadying my wrist, and began to record. "Don't move," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, sounding like an automated message or a police officer issuing a warning. "Just stay right there." Ethan scrambled for the sheet, stammering apologies that were lost in the roar of blood in my ears. I didn't care about his words. I focused the lens, ensuring I had clear visual confirmation of both parties, the proximity, and the context. Our bedroom, the monogrammed pillows, the framed, wedding photo on the nightstand staring directly at the scene. I methodically swept the camera across the room, capturing the discarded clothing, the disarray. When I was satisfied with the angles and the duration, having captured their humiliation and my proof, I lowered the phone. My lips curved into what I knew was a terrifyingly calm expression. "Get out of my bed, both of you. You have 5 minutes to dress and leave this property. Do not touch anything that belongs to me on your way out." I spoke as if I were addressing junior associates who had failed to meet a basic deadline. I stepped back, closing the door softly, deliberately. The lock clicked into place. I didn't lock them in. I locked them out. Of my space, out of my life, out of my capacity for mercy. I walked downstairs, my steps slow and measured. The house silent once more except for the frantic, muffled rustling I could hear echoing faintly from above. My mind was already racing through checklists: secure legal counsel, freeze joint financial records, change the locks. This was a tactical retreat, preparing for the inevitable war. I sat down at the kitchen island, pulling out my second phone, the one I used only for business contacts. My fingers flew across the screen, finding the number of David, Clara's husband. The man I had shared countless Saturday barbecues with, the man who believed he too had a perfect life. I needed an ally, someone equally ruined, equally meticulous. This was no time for soft feelings or misplaced loyalty. This required precision. I pressed the call button, the sound echoing in the sterile quiet. "David? It's Eleanor. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan." The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal. I was initiating a professional hostile takeover, an alliance founded on shared ruin and the meticulous pursuit of justice. I was ready to execute the plan. It wasn't planned. Nothing about that afternoon was planned, except perhaps the slow, systematic demolition of everything I thought was real. The headache started around noon, a brutal, pulsing drumbeat behind my eyes that no amount of coffee or pharmaceutical intervention could touch. I told my assistant I was done for the day, canceling my entire afternoon schedule with a weary sigh. It was barely 2 p.m., hours before Ethan was due back. He was supposed to be in a crucial all-day meeting downtown, the kind that demanded suits, PowerPoints, and the meticulous consumption of other people's time. I drove home through the blinding, relentless sun of Houston, thinking only of darkness, silence, and the cool sheets of my own bed. Pulling into the long, curved driveway, I noticed the car immediately. Not mine, but his. Ethan's charcoal gray sedan was parked snugly in the farthest spot of the garage, a place it only occupied after 7 p.m. on weekdays. Alarm bells weren't ringing yet. The mechanism for absolute trust was too deeply wired. Maybe the meeting was canceled. Maybe he felt unwell too. But the prickle of unease started crawling up my spine when I saw the faint light on, glowing from the master bedroom window on the second floor. A low, insistent hum, like a distant generator, started in my chest. I unlocked the front door, and the silence hit me first. a thick, oppressive vacuum that swallowed the sound of the key turning and the click of the deadbolt. Everything was too neat, too quiet for a sudden, solitary return. I slipped off my leather pumps in the marble entryway, placing them precisely beside the console table. My heart began a frantic, hollow rhythm against my ribs. And then, the scent. Not the faint, woody, expensive cologne Ethan used, but something floral, musky, sickly sweet, and entirely recognizable. Clara's signature perfume. It hung heavy in the central air, a chemical declaration of war saturating the atmosphere of my own home. I didn't rush. The woman I was then, the one who believed in happy endings and mutual respect, might have run up the stairs, screaming like a wounded animal. But the survivalist in me, the one who built my business from nothing, took over. I ascended the grand staircase slowly, each polished mahogany step a precise, measured count. The closer I got to the bedroom door, the colder I became. My hands were steady. When I reached the top landing, the door to the master suite was slightly ajar, maybe a couple of inches. A sliver of light and a muffled sound, not laughter, but a low, intimate murmur, escaped the opening. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door inward, gently, with the tip of my index finger, so the hinge wouldn't make a sound. The images burned onto my retina. A perfect, sickening tableau bathed in the afternoon light filtering through the sheer curtains. Ethan was standing near the window, adjusting his shirt, the easy, casual smile on his face, instantly freezing into a mask of abject horror as he saw me. Clara was scrambling from the bed, tangled in the custom-made silk sheets I had chosen for our anniversary, reaching desperately for a robe thrown carelessly over the antique armchair. They looked cheap, disorganized, and pathetic. They looked exactly like the villains in a low-budget production, exposed by the unforgiving midday light. The violation wasn't just sexual, it was territorial. It was a theft of my peace, my future, and my security. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop the briefcase that held the contracts I had forgotten. Ethan stammered my name. Sarah, wait. But the sound was meaningless noise, a buzzing insect I had no time to swat away. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the legal and financial damage assessment. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and switched the camera to video mode. "Don't move," I said, my voice unnervingly level, almost conversational. It was the calmness that terrified them more than any rage ever could. I panned the camera slowly, deliberately, capturing the rumpled bed, Clara's mortified face hidden behind her hands, and Ethan's stunned, half-dressed posture. "This is evidence," I stated simply. "And no, Ethan, I don't want to talk about it. I want to document it. Every single pathetic detail." Clara started to sob, whispering something about a mistake, about it only happening once, but I ignored her. Once I had recorded enough, the timestamp crucial, the context irrefutable, I stopped filming, but I didn't lower the phone. I stepped back out into the hallway, pulling the heavy door shut with a sharp, decisive click. I needed them contained, but I needed the next piece of leverage ready. I walked briskly down the hall to the guest bedroom, closing that door too. The sudden silence of the house was now my ally, a protective bubble. I sat on the clean duvet of the guest bed and inhaled deeply, trying to purge the heavy, saccharine scent of betrayal from my lungs. Ethan was wealthy, cunning, and connected. If I confronted him alone, he would deny, manipulate, and attempt to turn the narrative on me, painting me as the hysterical, wronged wife. I needed an unimpeachable witness, a co-conspirator who had as much to lose as I did, someone who could neutralize Clara's inevitable lies. I needed Mark, Clara's husband, the man whose professional life was interwoven with Ethan's. I found his number in the contact list on my desktop, a number I'd only ever used to arrange dinner parties. My fingers didn't tremble as I dialed. The betrayal was no longer pain. It was energy, cold, sharp, and focused. When Mark answered, his voice sounded tired, professional. The sound of a man who still believed his world was predictable, stable, and safe. "Mark, this is Sarah, Ethan's wife," I began, skipping the small talk, the niceties dissolving under the weight of the truth. "Need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan." The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal. I was initiating a professional hostile takeover, an alliance founded on shared ruin and the meticulous pursuit of justice. I was ready to execute the plan. The morning had been typical: rushed coffee, a quick peck on Ethan's cheek, the usual, promise to text later. I was supposed to be immersed in spreadsheets at the downtown office until at least 6 p.m., but by 2:30 p.m., the fluorescent lights had transformed into instruments of torture, drilling a relentless pressure behind my eyes. The paralytic migraine demanded immediate surrender. I grabbed my phone, sending a quick text to my husband. "Headache from hell. Heading home to crash. Don't worry about dinner." No reply. That wasn't unusual. He was likely deep in a meeting. The drive from the financial district back to Scottsdale was a blur of throbbing temples and nausea. Pulling into our usually silent, manicured driveway, I noticed Ethan's black SUV was already parked. Odd. He was typically rigorous about his schedule, rarely home before 4, even for the quietest of workdays. Perhaps he, too, was feeling unwell. I fumbled with the key, the metallic click echoing unnaturally in the profound stillness of the afternoon. As I stepped inside the cool, air-conditioned foyer, the silence wrapped around me, heavy and wrong. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was the strained silence of a secret being kept. My briefcase dropped soundlessly onto the entryway rug. I stopped, inhaling deeply. It wasn't the comforting scent of the cedar candles I loved or the faint, familiar aroma of coffee. It was a foreign, sharp, and cheap floral perfume. Clara's scent. A cold, hard knot immediately formed in my stomach, pulling all my internal organs into a tense spasm. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd dropped off a piece of paperwork, stopped by for a quick consultation. But the insidious instinct, the low, animalistic warning system every woman possesses, told me the truth was far simpler and infinitely uglier. I didn't call out his name. I didn't want a warning shot. I needed to see the full, unedited reality. I moved slowly, deliberately, pulling off my blazer and draping it over a banister. I climbed the oak staircase, the thick carpet muffling my approach. Each step was a deliberate, agonizing delay before the inevitable catastrophe. My heart was not pounding, it was vibrating, a silent, frantic drumbeat of dread. The hallway was dimmer than usual. I stopped just outside the master bedroom door. The handle was turned slightly down, unlocked. I pushed the door inward, gently, just enough to see the full tableau of my ruined life. It wasn't the loud, cinematic explosion of rage and tears I had always imagined a betrayal would be. It was quieter, fouler, profoundly intimate, and therefore exponentially worse. There they were, illuminated by the soft afternoon light filtering through the sheer linen curtains. Ethan, my husband of 10 years, and Clara, my neighbor, my confidant, my supposed friend. They were tangled together on our king-sized bed, their bodies a single grotesque sculpture of deceit. His shirt was haphazardly tossed near the dresser. Her low, careless laugh, a sound I instantly recognized, was the soundtrack to my ruin. The sight didn't make me scream. It didn't make me cry. It simply solidified the world into a single unbearable fact. I had been living a carefully constructed lie. For one paralyzed second, my brain stuttered, refusing to process the image. Then, the ice descended, swift and absolute. It wasn't rage. It was pure clinical calculation. I did not move another inch. I did not make a sound. My hand instinctively found the phone in my purse. I unlocked it silently, activating the camera and switching it to video mode. My fingers were steady. I filmed. I captured the messy intimacy, the casual disregard for everything we had built. I filmed Ethan's distinctive watch lying on the nightstand, Clara's specific jewelry, the precise pattern of our duvet cover, capturing the irrefutable truth of the location and the time. Proof. Evidence. That was the only currency that mattered now. I needed to ensure this could never be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a drunken mistake. When I finished the short, damning video, I backed away slowly, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a tiny sliver open. They were still oblivious, lost in their disgusting bubble. I wasn't done securing the perimeter. I retreated down the stairs, adrenaline now replacing the migraine pain. I went straight to the home office, closing the heavy oak door and locking it behind me. I sat at my desk, the air conditioning chilling the sweat on my neck. I immediately uploaded the video to a secure cloud server, backing up the evidence before I took the next critical step. I opened my contacts list. David. David was Clara's husband, Ethan's golf buddy, the man who had trusted me implicitly. He deserved to know, but more importantly, he was my necessary ally. I took a deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to calm the internal earthquake. I couldn't just blurt it out. I needed him composed, rational, and completely aligned with my strategy. I pressed his number. It rang once, twice. He answered, his voice cheerful, oblivious. "Hey, Ethan. What's up, man?" He assumed it was my husband. I straightened my spine, pulling the persona of the professional ghostwriter, the strategist, into my voice. "David, it's not Ethan. It's Sarah." My voice was low, devoid of inflection. He hesitated. "Sarah? Everything all right?" "No, David. Nothing is all right. I need you to sit down. I have something important and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan." The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise, clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal. I was initiating a professional hostile takeover, an alliance founded on shared ruin and the meticulous pursuit of justice. I was ready to execute the plan. It wasn't supposed to happen that Tuesday afternoon. I had a full day of meetings downtown, a crucial client presentation scheduled for 3. But the searing pain behind my eyes had started around 11. A migraine so debilitating I knew I couldn't function. I called my assistant, rescheduled everything, and made the half-hour drive back to our quiet, tree-lined street in Connecticut, thinking only of darkness and silence. I needed that signed contract for the morning, but my head simply refused to cooperate. Returning early was an anomaly in our perfectly structured lives, an unplanned deviation that shattered the beautiful facade we had built over a decade. I pulled into the driveway. Ethan's black SUV was already parked in the garage. Odd, I thought. He had a late lunch appointment he'd mentioned. Maybe he was also battling a headache. A faint alarm bell rang, quickly dismissed. We trusted each other implicitly. Trust was the bedrock of Sarah and Ethan. I let myself in using my key. expecting the cool, quiet atmosphere of a deserted midday house. Instead, I was hit by an immediate, overwhelming wave of scent. It wasn't the sandalwood and lavender room spray I used. It was a cloying, cheap floral perfume, Clara's signature scent. It was heavy, tropical, suffocating the air in the foyer. The house was silent, yet thick with a presence that felt entirely wrong. I kicked off my heels, the soft sound of them hitting the hardwood floor sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive stillness. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a migraine reaction. This was pure primal dread. I moved slowly, deliberately, past the kitchen where a half-empty bottle of expensive Cabernet sat on the counter. Wine we only drank to celebrate, or perhaps to sedate. I climbed the staircase, each step a countdown. The closer I got to the master bedroom, the denser the jasmine perfume became, clinging to the heavy air like a physical entity. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, analytical certainty that was settling over me. I wasn't going to find a sick husband. I was going to find a crime scene. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar. I stopped 3 feet away, not wanting to alert them, needing the element of surprise. I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing the nausea down. I didn't want to see it, yet some terrible, morbid curiosity compelled me. This was the moment that would define the rest of my life. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside. And there they were. The sight wasn't explicit, but it was devastatingly intimate. Ethan, my husband, the man who swore his vows beneath a canopy of roses, was tangled on the sheets with Clara, the woman I considered a friend, a neighbor, a confidante. They weren't moving frantically. They were resting, relaxed, the picture of casual, post-coital comfort. His arm was draped possessively around her, her head nestled into the curve of his neck, their faces slack with satisfied exhaustion. Our sheets, our private sanctuary, stained by their easy familiarity. It wasn't just sex. It was routine. The shock didn't register as a scream, or tears, or rage. It registered as a paralyzing coldness, a sudden, complete failure of the world's physics. My body went rigid. I was an observer, suddenly viewing my life through a pane of unbreakable glass. My hand instinctively went to my purse, not for a weapon, but for my phone. I didn't utter a word. I didn't move the door further. Slowly, silently, ensuring the phone's shutter sound was muted, I raised the device and began filming. I captured the room, the state of the sheets, the oblivious, satisfied look on Ethan's face, the gold band, glinting on his finger pressed against Clara's skin. I filmed the shoes carelessly discarded by the dresser, Clara's distinct silver ankle bracelet catching the sunlight. This wasn't proof for a shouting match. This was evidence for a court of law. This was the foundation of his ruin. When I had secured enough footage, every damning angle documented, I eased the door shut with the slightest click, a noise masked by the faint whirring of the air conditioning unit. I retreated, silently, descending the stairs like a ghost. I didn't need to stay. My mission was complete. The trust was gone, replaced by calculated vengeance. I walked straight to my home office, locked the door, and sank into the leather chair. My hands were steady now. The emotional devastation was compartmentalized, stored away until the war was won. I pulled up the contact I had looked up weeks ago, the one I hoped I would never need to call. David, Clara's husband. I needed an ally, someone who understood the depth of the humiliation and possessed the same resources for retaliation. I knew what I had to do. I had to offer him the undeniable, heartbreaking truth, but frame it as a mutually beneficial business transaction. "I need you to sit down," I had told him moments ago, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, the smell of Clara's cheap perfume still clinging to the lining of my jacket. "I have something important, and deeply disturbing to tell you about Clara and Ethan. The game had begun, and I was holding all the cards. I waited for his stunned silence to break, formulating the precise clinical language I would use to describe the wreckage of both our marriages. I wasn't just exposing a betrayal. I was initiating a professional hostile takeover, an alliance founded on shared ruin and the meticulous pursuit of justice. I was ready to execute the plan. David, though broken, was my key witness, my strategic partner. We would clean up this mess together, efficiently and utterly ruthlessly. We were no longer wives and husbands. We were co-executors of their demise. The chaos began not with a premeditated plan or a confrontation, but with a searing pain behind my eyes, a throbbing that felt like someone was trying to split my skull with an ice pick. I had been in the middle of a vital meeting, presenting the quarterly budget forecast downtown, when the light sensitivity became utterly unbearable. It wasn't a forgotten document or a banking errand that brought me home early. It was a crippling migraine that forced me to excuse myself abruptly, claiming a sudden flu, and abandon the rest of my appointments. I simply couldn't physically stay there. I needed the cool darkness and immediate silence of our bedroom, my sanctuary. I didn't text Mark. I just wanted to disappear under the duvet. I pulled the Volvo into the driveway of our perfectly manicured suburban home. The sight of Mark's heavy-duty truck already parked in the closed garage was the first anomaly. He usually left it outside if he knew I was coming home soon. He must be deep in a conference call, I thought, pulling my key from my purse. But as I stepped inside, the house felt wrong. It didn't feel lived in. It felt unnaturally quiet, sealed off. The only sound was the distant hum of the central air conditioning, struggling against the Texas heat. I kicked off, my heels in the mudroom. Then I smelled it. It wasn't the usual crisp scent of laundry detergent and the faint aroma of coffee Mark always left lingering. This was cloyingly sweet, heavy, and utterly foreign. A cheap imitation of the expensive Parisian perfume Jessica, our neighbor, always wore. I stopped dead in the hallway, the migraine momentarily forgotten, replaced by a cold, sharp dread that settled deep in my stomach. No, don't be ridiculous, Laura. Maybe Jessica dropped something off. But the doors were locked. No one drops things off inside a locked house. My heart rate accelerated, the pulsing in my temples now driven by pure adrenaline, not pain. I gripped the railing, forcing myself to move slowly, deliberately, not wanting to make a sound. The silence was the loudest accusation I had ever heard. The stairs creaked slightly under my weight, a small betrayal in the otherwise quiet house. I paused on the landing. The door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar, maybe an inch. The light filtering through the gap was dim, indicating the heavy blackout curtains were drawn. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to pretend I hadn't come home, to preserve the beautiful lie we had built. But the new tactical part of me, the part that had already formulated the alliance with David, demanded proof. I took a deep breath, the sickeningly sweet scent of Jessica's perfume now undeniable, thick as humidity. I did not knock. I did not whisper his name. I pushed the door open, slowly, just enough to see without announcing my presence. The world tilted sideways, yet remained horribly focused. Mark was there, sprawled across the white silk sheets I had just bought, his back to me. Entangled in the sheets with him, her head resting casually on his shoulder, was Jessica. Her dark hair was a stark contrast against the pristine white. They weren't moving quickly or frantically, covering themselves in a panic. They were languid, relaxed, caught in the quiet aftermath of their filth, talking softly, intimately, sharing a secret language I had never known. It wasn't the shock of the physical act that paralyzed me. It was the casual intimacy, The complete, utter disrespect for my presence, my home, my life, crystallized in that shared moment of post-coital complacency. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was routine. My breath caught, but I made no sound. No gasping, no dramatic tears, nothing to alert them to the executioner standing in the doorway. The old Laura, the emotional, loving wife, died right there, dissolving into the air thick with cheap perfume. What replaced her was a cold, efficient machine. I did not scream. I did not throw the designer vase sitting on the dresser. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, unlocked the camera, and started recording. The flash was off. The light was dim, but it was enough. I zoomed in just enough to capture Jessica's face, the proprietary way she was touching his arm, and then Mark's profile as he whispered something that made her giggle. Proof. Undeniable, time-stamped, irrefutable proof. The video was only 40 seconds long, but it contained the destruction of 2 marriages. When I had what I needed, I backed away silently, ensuring the door didn't click shut, letting them revel in their stolen moment, completely unaware that their lives had just been legally incinerated. I retreated down the hall to the guest bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the cold marble counter, the phone still clutched in my hand. Mark's truck was in the garage. They were trapped inside my home. I didn't call a lawyer immediately. I called David. I knew he was working from his downtown office, likely preparing for the same kind of budget meeting I had just escaped. I took 3 deep, steadying breaths, forcing my voice to be level, clinical, utterly devoid of the rage churning inside me. This wasn't a comfort call. It was a business proposal. He answered on the second ring, his tone preoccupied. "Laura, is everything okay?" I closed my eyes. "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet vibrating with controlled intensity. "I need you to listen very carefully and stay completely calm. I came home unexpectedly. Jessica is here. She is in my bed with Mark. I have video proof. They are currently upstairs. I need you to come home now. Do not call. Do not text. Do not alert them. I want you to be the one to open the door and see this." There was a long, terrible silence on the line. I could hear the background noise of his busy office, the distant tap of keyboards. Then, David's voice came back, hollow, stripped of all warmth, utterly devastating in its calmness. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Where are you?" "I'm downstairs waiting. Don't worry, they are secure. We have them exactly where we want them." The moment the call ended, I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and stared out at the backyard, where, just last week, we had hosted a barbecue. Now, I was not Laura the heartbroken wife. I was Laura, the strategist, setting the trap. David was my partner in ruin, and the game had just begun. I didn't actually forget the merger documents that day in our Manhattan high-rise office. The truth was far more pedestrian, yet utterly destructive. By early afternoon, a searing, throbbing migraine had clamped down on my skull, the kind that makes light physically painful and demands absolute silence. I texted my assistant that I was leaving early, deciding the quiet darkness of our Connecticut home would be better than the fluorescent glare of the office. Michael had called me earlier, confirming he was heading to a long, tedious client meeting until 6. Perfect, I thought. I could crash in the guest bedroom, dark and cool, and hopefully reset before he got back. The drive home was a blur of pounding temples and controlled breathing. Pulling into the familiar driveway, I noticed his car, the sleek black sedan, was already there. Odd, I thought, fighting a fresh wave of nausea. He said he wouldn't be back until 6. Maybe the meeting was canceled. Relief warred momentarily with a flicker of suspicion. I parked quickly, fumbling with my keys, eager for the blessed dark. The silence that met me inside was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't the usual comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was the charged stillness of a stage set right before the climax. The blinds in the living room were drawn, unusual for a sunny afternoon. And then I smelled it, a scent that didn't belong. Not Michael's standard sandalwood cologne, but something sharper, sweeter, aggressively floral. Sarah's perfume. Our neighbor, Sarah. The one whose kids I had watched last month while she and David were supposedly having a weekend away. My migraine vanished entirely. Adrenaline, cold and clear, flooded my system, replacing the pain with a terrifying focus. Every sound amplified. The slight creak of the floorboards beneath my expensive leather pumps. The distant, almost imperceptible sound coming from the upstairs master bedroom. I moved slowly, professionally, like a detective in my own life's ruin. I didn't call. Out. I didn't need confirmation. I needed evidence. I reached the landing. The door to our bedroom, the sanctuary we had designed together, was slightly ajar. My hand paused on the cool brass handle. This was the point of no return. The moment I became a statistic, a cliché, a woman whose entire world was defined by the space between a half-open door and a devastating truth. I took a breath, not of air, but of pure, crystallized rage, and pushed the door inward just enough to see. The scene was exactly what I had denied existed for months. Michael, disheveled, hastily trying to cover himself. Sarah, pale and flushed, scrambling to pull her silk dress back over her shoulders, her blonde hair a mess of chaos against the white pillowcases. They weren't whispering sweet nothings. They were trapped, caught in the hideous, blinding spotlight of their own guilt. Their eyes snapped to mine, wide, horrified, and undeniably caught. The air was thick with cheap desperation and the cloying, sickly sweet smell of Sarah's betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the car keys or the handbag. My reaction wasn't emotional. It was mechanical, a strange clinical detachment that saved me from collapsing. I raised the phone I was already holding, the one I used to text David, and switched the camera to video mode. "Don't move," I said. My voice was low, steady, almost unnervingly calm. It was a command, not a plea. "Don't you dare move." They froze like statues cast in shame. Michael, finally finding his voice, stammered, "Laura, wait. It's not what it looks like. Please just..." "Shut up, Michael," I instructed, my eyes fixed on the screen, ensuring the lighting was adequate, capturing the disarray of the bed, the scattered clothes, the sheer panic etched on their faces. This footage wasn't for me to cry over later. It was for the court, for the leverage, for the complete forensic destruction of his fabricated narrative. I filmed for a full minute, documenting the room, their expressions, the evidence of their betrayal laid bare. Then, without lowering the phone, I backed out of the room. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, deliberately, and twisted the lock. The soft metallic click sounded louder than any gunshot. They were trapped, literally and figuratively. I walked downstairs to the kitchen island, pulling out my laptop. I didn't need David to secure the evidence on his end. I needed him to be ready to execute the legal strategy. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened the folder labeled Divorce Contingency. Everything was there. The prenuptial agreement copy, the contacts for the top forensic accountant, and the shark of a lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I sent a single clear email to Henderson, attaching the video evidence I had just recorded and time-stamped, ensuring the chain of custody was flawless. Then, I picked up the phone again. David answered on the first ring, his voice tight with controlled anxiety. "It's done," I stated, my breath finally catching. forcing the words out. The strategist was reporting back. I have the footage. They are upstairs, locked in the master suite. Sarah is with him. A sharp, audible intake of breath on the other end. Locked in? Are you safe? Yes. I'm giving them 20 minutes to consider their options before I call the police for trespassing. I need you. Here, David. Now. We are going to greet them together when they come down. And we need to make sure their story for the next 20 years starts right here, right now, with the absolute, undeniable truth of what they did. The partnership was sealed, not with vows, but with shared, righteous fury. The game hadn't just begun. The first decisive move had been played. I was done with silence. It was time for the sound of shattering glass, the sound of their lives breaking. The morning had started with the perfect glossy veneer of our life. I had kissed Mark goodbye, assuring him I would handle the final contract documents at the downtown bank for the merger we'd been working on for 6 months. But a few hours later, the migraine hit. A sudden, blinding vice behind my eyes, the kind that made the fluorescent lights of the city feel like spears. I couldn't focus. I couldn't even read the fine print required for the wire transfer. I needed the specific prescription-strength medication I kept locked in my bedside drawer at home, far away from the noise and pressure of the office. The bank could wait an hour. Survival in that moment came first. I pulled into the quiet, tree-lined driveway of our Austin home around 1:30 p.m. I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was only thinking about darkness and silence. But as I parked, a small, cold droplet of unease landed in my stomach. Mark's sedan was already in the garage. Odd. He had an important client lunch scheduled across town, a meeting he had assured me was critical. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he forgot his presentation notes. Maybe the meeting was canceled. I grabbed my briefcase, opened the front door with my key, and stepped into the silence. The house was not just quiet. It was suffocatingly still. Usually there was the low hum of the air conditioning, the gentle whir of the filtration system. Now there was nothing but a heavy, unnatural vacuum, and then the scent. It hit me like a physical blow, coating the air in a thick, sweet fog. It was definitely not my perfume, and it was certainly not the subtle, masculine cedar cologne Mark favored. This was jasmine and gardenia, aggressive and cloying, the exact signature scent of Vanessa, our dear neighbor from 2 houses down. The woman whose mail I collected when she traveled, the woman I trusted implicitly. My heart didn't begin to pound in fear. It froze solid, transforming into a hard, dense stone of pure adrenaline. The migraine vanished, replaced by an icy clarity. I knew where they were. I didn't need to check the kitchen or the laundry room. I placed my briefcase and my heels silently on the antique runner by the stairs. I moved upward, soundless, placing my weight carefully to avoid the usual creak on the 3rd step. Every shadow, every pattern on the wall, seemed to watch me, anticipating the inevitable catastrophe. I stopped outside the master bedroom door, the room we had shared for 10 years, where we made promises and planned futures. I didn't hesitate. I didn't knock. I took a deep, steady breath that tasted faintly of Vanessa's cheap perfume and pushed the door open, slowly, just enough to witness the ruin. The afternoon sun streamed through the wide bay window, illuminating the scene with brutal honesty. Our expensive, cream-colored sheets were violently disarrayed, a landscape of wreckage. And there they were. Mark, my husband, his face a mask of momentary pleasure and immediate terror, and Vanessa, tangled beneath him. They were caught, ludicrously exposed, like statues captured in a moment of mortal sin. The shock wasn't the nakedness. The shock was the casual, effortless violation. The way Mark's hand rested on her. The intimacy that should have belonged only to me. The betrayal was a physical ache. a sudden, explosive puncture in the E. Reality I had built. But I did not scream. I did not drop the useless document I still held clutched in my hand. Their eyes flew open simultaneously, registering my presence. Mark's face twisted into the desperate, pathetic anticipation of a lie. I cut him off, not with words, but with a deliberate, audible click. I had pulled out my phone, opening the video camera. I didn't point it at them immediately. My hands were steady, my movements clinical. I centered the camera on the framed photo of our wedding day sitting on the nightstand, letting the lens linger on our smiling, ignorant faces. Then, I panned slowly, the scattered clothes, the evidence of their disgusting trespass, before settling the lens directly on their wide, terrified, exposed faces. "Don't move," I instructed, my voice low, steady, and utterly devoid of any recognizable human emotion. It was the voice of a judge delivering a death sentence. "Say nothing. I am recording this for evidence." Mark scrambled for the sheet, the shame finally eclipsing the lust. Vanessa whimpered, burying her face. I had what I needed. I backed out of the room, closing the door softly but firmly. I didn't lock it. I needed them to think they still had a brief window to dress, to try and talk their way out, to panic. I walked downstairs, my posture ramrod straight, the phone still recording ambient noise. I went straight to the kitchen island, where the light was bright, and my signal was strong. I was shaking now, yes, but it was the high-frequency tremor of pure, concentrated power. I pulled up David's number, Vanessa's husband. He answered on the third ring, sounding rushed, professional, oblivious. "Elizabeth, is everything okay?" I leaned against the cold granite counter, staring out the window at the perfect sunny day. "David," I said, my voice gaining strength with every syllable. The calm of a predator who has cornered her prey settled over me. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am at my house. Mark is here, and Vanessa is also here, and I have all the proof we are ever going to need." I paused, letting the implication land like a mortar shell. "Stop whatever you are doing. Drive home immediately, but do not go to your house. Meet me here in 10 minutes. We are going to greet them together when they come down. We need to make sure their story for the next 20 years starts right here. Right now, with the absolute, undeniable truth of what they did." The line clicked. David hadn't said another word. He just hung up, the silence confirming his horrified understanding. I had sealed the partnership. The game was mine to win. The game was mine to win. But first I needed ammunition that went beyond the visual confirmation. I still had his phone, a device he had guarded like the keys to Fort Knox. Sitting in my locked car, parked 3 blocks from our house, waiting for David, the man whose trust had been shattered just as violently as mine. I finally unlocked the screen using the birthday of our deceased dog, a password I'd accidentally seen him input months ago. The shock of the act itself paled in comparison to the calculated cruelty I found waiting in the message threads. It wasn't just a physical betrayal. It was a character assassination delivered in daily texts. They had a running joke about my predictable Tuesday knitting group, which was their designated meeting time. They called me the Monument because I was supposedly solid, unmoving, and oblivious. There were screenshots of the expensive jewelry I'd bought myself, followed by vile comments about how I was compensating for his lack of interest. The deep, hot anguish I had felt upon seeing them together morphed into an icy, surgical rage. This wasn't a mistake. This was a well-planned campaign of disrespect. I saved every single thread, every picture, every calendar entry they'd shared, meticulously backing it all up to the cloud. 10 minutes later, David pulled up. He was pale, his tie slightly loosened, looking less like the successful corporate lawyer I knew, and more like a man facing the gallows. He didn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes mirroring the hollow pit of my own stomach. We drove back towards the house in absolute silence, parking discreetly behind a large oak tree across the street. We waited. Time stretched, thick and painful. We knew they would have to come out eventually, either for supplies or because they realized the silence was too loud. Finally, the front door opened. He emerged first, my husband, looking disheveled and confused, squinting slightly in the late afternoon sun. He wasn't holding her hand, but he was standing slightly in front of her, his body language still trying to assert some kind of protective ownership over the situation. Then she followed, my neighbor, my supposed friend, pulling her coat tight, her eyes darting nervously. David and I stepped out from behind the oak, side by side, a unified front of cold, precise vengeance. The color drained from my husband's face first. He stumbled back a step, colliding with her. She gasped, a small, pathetic sound. "Eleanor? David? What are you two doing here?" My husband stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply lifted my phone and started recording the entire interaction. "We came to say goodbye," I stated, my voice steady, surprisingly devoid of any recognizable emotion. They immediately launched into the script I knew was coming. "Listen, honey, it was a mistake," he pleaded, taking a hesitant step toward me. "It was just a few weeks. It meant nothing, I swear. It was a lapse in judgment." A lapse in judgment that included mocking my appearance in texts, calling me the monument, and planning an anniversary getaway with her using my business credit card, I countered, projecting the recordings of his own vile voice from the cloud backup I had synchronized to my watch. The sheer volume of proof stunned them into silence. They realized instantly that this wasn't a hysterical confrontation. This was a legal deposition. David finally broke the silence, addressing his wife with a lethal calmness. "The locks on the house have already been changed, Sarah. And your belongings have been boxed up and will be donated if not collected by the end of the week. Our divorce lawyer, Mr. Henderson, will be in touch tomorrow morning." I nodded, reinforcing the strategy. "I filed the emergency restraining order 10 minutes ago, citing emotional distress and financial misconduct based on the evidence I just shared. You two have exactly 5 minutes to get whatever minimal items you have in my house, and then you are to vacate the premises permanently. Any attempt to contact me, my family, or step foot on this property will be met with immediate legal action. Consider yourselves evicted." They tried to argue, they tried to beg, they tried to minimize the damage, claiming the evidence was old or taken out of context. But their words evaporated in the face of my prepared calmness and David's unwavering gaze. The next 20 minutes were a silent, humiliating spectacle. They rushed back inside, grabbing backpacks and duffel bags. My husband reemerged carrying a briefcase and a gym bag, his face a mottled mix of shame and disbelief that I, his monument, had orchestrated his complete financial and social dismantling in under an hour. She followed, trying to avoid looking at David, who stood like a statue carved of granite. I watched them load his beat-up sedan, the car he always insisted on keeping for casual drives. As they drove away, together, as they always planned to be, there was no triumph, only a deep, sterile sense of clean completion. David and I exchanged a long look. We weren't friends, but we were comrades in a successful operation. We had taken back the narrative. I went back inside the house that was finally, completely mine. The scent of her cheap floral perfume was still lingering, but I opened every window, letting the cold air scour the place clean. The first thing I did was call the contractor. We weren't just changing the locks, we were gutting the master suite. Months later, I stood on the balcony of a small villa overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The house in Miami was sold, the divorce finalized swiftly and decisively in my favor, thanks to the undeniable evidence and the strategic partnership with David, who had also secured a clean break. My hair was shorter, my skin was tanned, and my bank account was healthier than ever. I was traveling, writing, and most importantly, laughing, a sound that had been absent from my life for years. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, back in my new city, I saw him. He was waiting tables at a low-end cafe downtown. He looked tired, older than his years, and dressed in a slightly stained uniform. Sarah wasn't with him. I heard later they lasted less than 6 months once they realized the reality of sharing his meager post-divorce existence. He saw me. His eyes widened, a flicker of the old entitlement returning, followed instantly by profound defeat. He paused, holding a dirty plate, clearly wondering if he should approach me. I met his gaze, and what struck me wasn't anger or pain or even pity. It was nothing. He was just a man in a cafe, a distant acquaintance whose life was entirely irrelevant to mine. The true sign of healing isn't when you forgive. It's when you no longer feel the need to remember. I didn't slow down, didn't flinch, and simply continued walking towards my waiting taxi, carrying on with my truly wonderful, uncomplicated life. If you are listening to my story right now, maybe you are sitting in your car or doing the dishes, or perhaps you are lying awake at 3 a.m. with that gnawing feeling in your gut. Please, hear this. Your intuition is your most valuable asset. That tightness in your chest is not crazy. It is a warning. Trust it. Be meticulous, be calm, and be utterly ruthless in defending your peace. You don't need to descend into their chaos to win. You need to rise to a level of strategy they could never comprehend. I took back my life, and you can take back yours. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you even a fraction of the strength you need, then do 2 things for me right now. First, comment below and tell me what city you are listening from and what time it is. Let's build this community of strength. Second, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support ensures that I can keep sharing these stories, proving that the end of a relationship is never the end of you.